African History Case Studies of Collaborators The Baganda as Collaborators. Case Studies of Collaborators The Baganda as Collaborators. In 1875 from the south, Stanley travelled around Lake Victoria and ended up in Kabokamutis Awan's court. Baganda's collaboration began back as 1862 when Kabokamutis Awan welcomed John Speke. Stanley also visited the Kaboka, and his visit coincided with threats being mounted on Buganda from Panioro and Egypt from the north. Mutis Awan, knowing that whites were powerful, he befriended them to have an advantage over his neighbours and enemies. This is why Mutis Awan requested Stanley to write a letter inviting European missionaries, which led to CMS in 1877 and Roman Catholic White Fathers in 1879. By 1884, at the death of Kabokamutis Awan, Europeans had already established themselves in Buganda, especially through missionary work, which produced a class of Baganda converts who collaborated with the British in establishing colonialism, like Suropolo Kagwa, Seme Kakangulu. QN. To what extent did the Baganda collaborate with the British? Largely, the Baganda collaborated with the British, as evidenced below. They warmly welcomed explorers like Kabokamutis Awan in the 1860s, welcomed John Speke and H.M. Stanley. Kabokamutis Awan, on advice of Stanley, invited European Christian missionaries such that he cooperated with white men. Accommodation of Europeans like church missionary societies at Mango and Roman White Catholic Fathers at Rubaga. Most Baganda became Christian converts, especially of Church Missionary Society, of whom was Apollo. African History Case Studies of Collaborators The Baganda as Collaborators. Baganda Seme Kakangulu helped in extension of British colonial rule in eastern Uganda. Baganda collaborated with the British in defeat of Panioro resistance. Baganda accepted to sign the infamous Baganda Agreement of 1900. However, to some extent, they resisted. Kabokamutis Awan imprisoned Baker's delegation in 1875. Kaboka and Mwanga persecuted European Christian missionaries in 1885 and 1886 in Uganda martyrs at Namugongo. In spite of European Christian missionary teachings, African tradition religion persisted in Uganda. The respect of loophole never reduced. Some Baganda resisted taxation system by running away from homes. They resisted forceful growing of cash crops like the Kaboko coffee, where Kaboko meant cane/flogging. African History Case Studies of Collaborators The Baganda as Collaborators. He was also involved in another battle at Kijangot, after which Mwanga awarded him with the title Nilondo. He also became a chief of Bulundovini, which bordered Buja and River Nile. In February 1892, in company with Captain Williams, he commanded a force of 600. In Africa Blue Book Volume 2, 1893, Captain Lugard, former representative of IB Company, paid tribute to Kakangulu as among the reliable loyal men. In his book Rise of Our East African Empire Volume 2, Leopold is quoted saying, "There were 3 men in Uganda whom I thoroughly trusted, i.e. Sakali Kasingiri, Alakasi Sabo and Seme Kakangulu. Seme became a hero in religious wars of 1880s and 1890s in Buganda and was popular in British wars of conquest. In 1888-1890 there was a civil war in Buganda in which Christians and Mwanga formed an alliance that succeeded in ousting Muslims. The Christians won partly because of leadership of Seme Kakangulu for Protestants and Gabriel Kintu for Catholics. Kakangulu was also instrumental in the capture of Mengo from the Muslims. When the British embarked on effective colonization of Uganda and Kenya in the last decade of the 19th century, Kakangulu showed up as a collaborator. In 1892, following religious conflicts in Uganda, the Catholics spread to an island on Lake Victoria in Buddy. A decision was made by the British to send an expedition to dislodge the Catholics. It was Kakangulu who led it. Again in 1892, Kakangulu helped to subdue Busoga for the IB Company. African History Case Studies of Collaborators The Baganda as Collaborators. In 1895, Seme Kakangulu, commanding 900 Ganda volunteers, helped the British to silence the Bukusu resistance in western Kenya. When Kabelga was chased out of Panioro in 1894, Kakangulu had been allocated chief of captured lands of Buja, and later in 1899 helped the British to capture Kabelga and Mwanga, who were waging a struggle against British rule. Seme was one man who did more than most for the British to export the Buganda model of leadership to other parts of Buganda Protectorate. In spite of the numerous attacks from the Langi, by 1899 he had managed to establish a port of Kawiri Island on Lake Kyoga, and he was now in stronger position to extend his influence eastwards. Kakangulu also established a force among the Aitso at Sao, and it was from here that he waged serious war against the Langi, whom he finally repulsed. By 1900, Seme was operating southwards to Budoka, near a male town of eastern Uganda. The people of the area being inadequately armed and having no central authority to organize a resistance, they were easily conquered. Kakangulu divided all conquered areas into administrative countries, which he appointed his own officials, and he established Kiganda model of administration. Kakangulu's success in eastern Uganda made him become too ambitious and began regarding himself king of eastern Uganda, and he wanted the British to recognize him so. The British were alarmed by his intentions and they took over his headquarters at Budoka in 1901. He had achieved a lot in eastern Uganda. He constructed roads in Mbale, enforced cash crop production,